Let's go back in time to 2020, which really I don't want to, but for the sake of the video, we have to. The year previously, the Houston Texans went 10-6 and won the AFC South and made the playoffs. They were even able to win a playoff game, as in the wildcard round, they beat the Bills 22-19 in an absolute overtime thriller. And in the divisional round, they were doing very, very good. In the second quarter, they were up 24-0. But a few bonehead decisions later, and they somehow lost 51-31. Now, during this time, the best player on the Texans was Deandre Hopkins. But Hopkins was very, very special. Not only was he the best player on the Texans, he was the best player at his right. You would be wrong, as on the first day of 2020 free agency, the Texans traded Hopkins to the Cardinals for pretty much nothing, a Doritos bag and Clorox wipes. At the time, the Cardinals seemed like they just robbed the Texans of pretty much everything they owned. But 3 years later, it's safe to look and review at this trade and see who came out on top, see if the narrative changed at all. So today, we are going to be revisiting the DeAndre Hopkins trade. Before we get started, there is some pretty important context to know. A month and a half prior, head coach Bill O'Brien was also the GM. He was named the GM in January 2020, and if you know anything about head coaches being the GMs as well, it usually doesn't end well. So let's look at this trade in its full and see who everyone got. If you didn't know the trade before, well, here you go, and you can see why I said it was a highway robbery at the time. Of course, we all know the Cardinals got DeAndre Hopkins, but the Texans got David. You can see from the stats, he didn't really amount to much in Houston. In 2020, he started and played in 12 games and rushed for a little under 700 yards. In 2021, he only started in 4 but played in 13, and he only rushed for 228. In 2022, he joined the Saints, which I didn't even know until making this video, and he only played 5 games, didn't do anything there, and currently, I think he's done from the NFL. He has a really trashy career, and he deserves his own video, but anyways, besides that, David Johnson, that was a loss for the Texans. The 2020 second rounder the Texans got from the Cardinals was 40th overall, and with that pick, they took Ross Blacklock, a nose tackle from TCU. He spent 2 seasons with the Texans and ended up doing nothing, and 2 weeks before the 2022 NFL season began, he was traded to the Vikings. He's still on the Vikings, but he still hasn't done anything in the NFL. This pick was a huge swing and miss by them, and another loss by the Texans. Alright, so this 2021 4th round pick that they got from the DeAndre Hopkins trade, well, this is going to get really confusing, so just please bear with me. So they traded the 4th round pick to the Patriots, which ended up getting traded to the Bengals, and they took Tyler Shelvin, who only spent 2 seasons in Cincinnati before being released, and he's now with the Tennessee Titans. In this trade, they got 2 picks and a player. That player was Marcus Cannon, and he only spent 1 season with the Texans before he went back to the Patriots. The first pick I'm going to be talking about is a 2021 5th round pick that they got, but they traded it to the Panthers, and the Panthers took Davion Nixon, who hasn't done anything in the NFL so far. They also got a 6th round pick in the trade, and they kept that pick, and with that pick, they selected defensive tackle out of Arizona, Roy Lopez. So far in his NFL career, he's been pretty good, especially for a 6th round pick. He has started a majority of the games in his career, and Ross Blacklock, who we talked about earlier, he's doing better than him. And you know how earlier I talked about how Bill O'Brien was the head coach and the GM? Well, surprise, surprise. After an 0-4 start in 2020, Bill O'Brien was fired from both head coach and GM. Ever since this trade, the Texans have been a huge loss for the Texans. It's now time to talk about the Cardinals and DeAndre Hopkins, but shockingly, they also lost the trade. In 3 seasons with the Cardinals, he wasn't bad, but I think a lot of people expected a lot more from him. Injuries and health has been a big problem for Hopkins in his Cardinals tenure, which is completely out of the Cardinals' control and is very, very unfortunate. The Cardinals released Hopkins earlier this year, and he signed with the Tennessee Titans a few weeks ago, which means that the Hopkins-Cardinals era is over. I think it's safe to say that DeAndre Hopkins with the Cardinals was a disappointment. So it's time to decide who won the trade. Nobody. Some people expected the duo of Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins to end up in a Super Bowl victory, or at least an appearance. So the fact they couldn't even win a playoff game is very, very disappointing. And it now looks like the Cardinals could very likely go down the same path as the Texans, where Kyler Murray gets traded and they go on a full rebuild. While the future is looking better for the Texans, when it comes to what they got in that trade, it amounts to nothing. So it's a rare lose-lose trade.